Nothing comes from without. All things come from within, from the subconscious. You're not searching the way other people search. You pause longer. You notice more. And sometimes you feel like something in you already knows what this is about before the words arrive. There's a quiet question moving through you lately. Not loud enough to interrupt your day, not sharp enough to demand answers, but present. It shows up in small moments. When you're doing something familiar and it suddenly feels slightly off. Or when something new appears and instead of excitement, there's a strange sense of recognition, like you've been here before. Not literally, internally. This isn't about becoming better or fixing yourself or adding another layer of understanding. It's about something softer than that and deeper. It's about remembering, not memory the way we usually mean it, not facts, not stories, more like orientation, a sense of how things were always meant to feel from the inside. You don't arrive at this feeling all at once. It comes in fragments, moments where the noise drops, where effort loosens, where you stop trying to be impressive, even to yourself. And in those moments, something familiar moves closer. You might not have words for it yet. Most people don't, but you recognize the feeling. There's a common idea that growth means becoming someone else, a more confident version, a healed version, a higher functioning version, and on the surface, that makes sense. We compare old photos, old habits, old reactions. We see change and assume identity has shifted. But notice something. Even as your behavior changes, even as your preferences evolve, there's a part of you that hasn't moved at all. The part that notices the change. That part feels the same at 12 as it does now. Quieter maybe, more layered, but unmistakably familiar. You don't need to work to access it. You just stop leaning away from it. And that's where remembering begins. Not as a dramatic realization, more like a gentle correction, like adjusting your posture without thinking about it. Your body already knows where balance is. So does your awareness. Pause here for a moment, not to think, just to notice that you're already here. That's often when it happens. When people talk about awakening, they usually imagine a breakthrough, a moment where everything clicks into place. But that's not how it actually unfolds for most. It arrives sideways, through irritation, through restlessness, through the sense that you're doing everything right but something still feels slightly misaligned. Not wrong, just off-center. That discomfort isn't a problem. It's information. Not telling you to push harder, not telling you to give up, just quietly pointing out that you're reaching for something you already carry. And here's the part we rarely say out loud. You didn't forget by accident. Forgetting was part of the design. If you had arrived here remembering everything, if you'd known from the start how perception shapes experience, how reality responds more to orientation than effort, there would have been nothing to explore, no texture, no contrast, no discovery. Forgetting created the conditions for experience, and remembering isn't about undoing that. It's about softening back into alignment with what's always been underneath. Around now, you might feel like there's more unfolding beneath these words. There is. We'll come back to it. Think about how often you've tried to improve something that wasn't broken. Your personality, your way of thinking, your emotional responses. You learn to monitor yourself, to edit reactions, to optimize your inner world the same way people optimize productivity. And sometimes that helped, but other times it just created distance. Distance from your natural rhythm, from the version of you that doesn't need supervision. The truth is, alignment doesn't feel like control. It feels like relief. It feels like the moment you stop holding your breath, only to realize you'd been holding it for years. And the strange part? When alignment returns, nothing flashy happens. Life doesn't suddenly obey you. Problems don't vanish, but your relationship to experience changes. Less resistance, less interpretation, more clarity. Not clarity as in answers, clarity as in orientation. You're no longer trying to be someone else in order to deserve your own experience. You're just present enough to let it meet you where you are. Here's a subtle realization that changes everything when it lands. Reality doesn't reward you for effort. It reflects you. Not morally, not judgmentally, neutrally, like a mirror that responds to posture, not intention. You don't get punished for misalignment. You feel friction. And that friction isn't telling you to try harder. It's telling you to turn slightly, just enough to face what's already here. Let that settle. If you've ever felt like you're living slightly out of phase with your own life, like you're doing what makes sense but not what feels true, that's not failure, that's remembering trying to happen. It doesn't come with instructions, it comes with sensations. A pull toward simplicity, a growing intolerance for noise, internal and external. A desire for experiences that feel clean instead of impressive. You might notice you're less interested in proving things, less compelled to convince anyone, especially yourself. Not because you've figured everything out, but because something older is reasserting itself, something quieter. There's a version of you that exists just a fraction of a step to the side of this one, not better, not worse, just differently oriented, and you felt it. In moments where you responded instead of reacted, where you spoke without rehearsing, where you moved without second-guessing. Those moments weren't accidents, they were brief overlaps, alignment windows, and the more you notice them, the more frequent they become, not because you force them, but because you stop interfering. Notice how effort dissolves when something feels natural. You don't try to hear a song you love. You don't strain to recognize a familiar face. Recognition is immediate. That's what remembering feels like. Here's a quiet truth most people overlook. Suffering isn't a lesson, it's a signal, not a punishment, not a test. Just feedback indicating that your perception is working against your natural orientation. And the moment you stop arguing with that signal, the moment you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And instead feel into, what am I resisting? The intensity changes, sometimes dramatically, sometimes subtly, but always honestly. You don't need to dismantle your beliefs one by one. You don't need to analyze your past. Perception shifts faster than belief ever could. When you see differently, belief follows on its own. That's why remembering doesn't feel like effort. It feels like allowing. If this resonates, you may have noticed something else too, a sense that this isn't just happening to you. There's a quiet, individual awakening moving through people who don't talk about it, who aren't announcing it, who might not even have language for it. They're just simplifying, recentering, listening differently, not becoming new, remembering old. Stay with this feeling. There's more beneath it. At some point, you realize that motivation feels different now. You're not chasing outcomes, you're responding to resonance. Certain choices feel clean, others feel heavy, even if they look good on paper. And instead of forcing yourself through that heaviness, you pause. That pause is new, not because you learned it, but because you stopped overriding yourself. And in that pause, alignment quietly reasserts itself. Here's something worth noticing. The more aligned you feel, the less you feel the need to explain yourself. Not because you're withdrawing, but because explanation implies defense, and you're no longer defending your existence. You're inhabiting it. Let this land. Around the 10-minute mark, it often becomes clear that what's unfolding here connects further than it first appeared. We'll let it open naturally. There's an interesting shift that happens when remembering deepens. Time feels different, not slower, not faster, less important. You stop measuring progress in milestones and start noticing orientation instead. Am I forcing this? Or am I responding? Am I tense? Or am I present? Those questions don't require answers. They recalibrate you just by being noticed. Parallel versions of you aren't a theory. They're experiential. Every time you choose alignment over effort, you step closer to one. Every time you react out of habit, you drift towards another. None are wrong. They're just different trajectories. And remembering isn't about choosing the right one. It's about recognizing which one feels like home. Home doesn't always feel comfortable, but it does feel honest. You might have moments now where old patterns try to reassert themselves. Old fears, old urgency, old narratives. They don't mean you're going backward. They mean you're noticing. Awareness always precedes change. And remembering doesn't erase the past. It recontextualizes it. Notice how much gentler you are with yourself lately, or how much you want to be. That's not weakness. That's alignment returning. Here's a thought you don't need to believe. Just notice. What if you were never meant to optimize this experience? What if you were meant to inhabit it, to feel it, respond to it, let it shape you without trying to dominate it? That orientation alone changes everything. Pause again. If you've ever felt like you're standing at the edge of something, but there's no dramatic leap to make, that's this. Remembering doesn't demand action. It invites honesty. You may find yourself re-evaluating success, not rejecting it, just redefining it. Success starts to feel less like accumulation and more like coherence. Do my thoughts align with my actions? Do my actions align with my values? Do my values feel chosen or inherited? Those questions arise naturally when remembering deepens. They don't need answers right away. They guide orientation. If this feels familiar, you're not alone in it. Many people are arriving at the same quiet recognition from completely different paths, different languages, different cultures, different lives. Same underlying shift. There's a moment, usually subtle, when you realize you're no longer waiting to become someone. You're just here, and that's enough. We're approaching another layer now. Around 20 minutes in, it often becomes clear that this remembering isn't a destination. It's an ongoing relationship. We'll keep moving with it. The relationship between consciousness and experience isn't hierarchical. Consciousness doesn't sit above reality, controlling it. It participates. And participation feels very different from control. When you participate, you listen, you respond, you adjust. When you control, you impose, you resist, you override. Remembering naturally shifts you from one to the other. You might notice your intuition sharpening, not as a mystical voice, but as a clearer sense of timing. When to speak, when to wait, when to act, when to let something dissolve. That's not prediction, that's alignment. Another subtle change. You stop romanticizing struggle. You still face challenges, but you don't need them to validate you. Ease stops feeling suspicious. Peace stops feeling temporary. Let this breathe. If you feel moved to share, you might recognize parts of yourself in these words, not as agreement, but as recognition. That shared noticing matters more than you might think. The most surprising part of remembering is how ordinary it feels. No fireworks, no final answers, just a sense of internal coherence returning, like tuning an instrument you didn't realize was slightly out of tune. You may still have goals, desires, ambitions. They just aren't carrying your identity anymore. They're expressions, not definitions. This is why the idea of becoming someone new eventually loses its appeal. You're not unfinished, you're temporarily disoriented, and orientation can return gently, without force. As this continues to unfold, you may notice fewer dramatic emotions and more steady presence. That's not numbness, that's integration. Another quiet invitation, if it resonates. Notice where in your life you're already responding instead of forcing. Those are the places remembering is already active. The conversation doesn't end here. It continues the next time you pause instead of push. The next time you trust a subtle yes or an equally subtle no. Remembering doesn't announce itself. It feels like recognition, like coming back into the room you never actually left. And even now, as these words settle, something in you already knows how to continue, not forward, inward, gently, naturally, without needing to become anything at all. And there's something else that starts to happen when this remembering settles in. You begin to notice how little you actually need to add, not to your life, not to your personality, not even to your understanding. The urge to accumulate, ideas, labels, explanations, starts to soften. You're not rejecting them. You're just no longer hungry in the same way, because something fundamental has already been met. At first, this can feel confusing. You might wonder if you're losing motivation, if you're becoming passive, if you're letting go too much. But look closer. What's fading isn't your drive, it's your self-pressure, the constant internal commentary, the background tension that said, I should be somewhere else by now. When that voice quiets, space opens, and in that space, a different kind of movement appears. More precise, more honest, less frantic. You may notice that certain conversations no longer hold your attention, not because you're superior, not because you're disengaged, but because they orbit problems you're no longer trying to solve. You've stopped treating existence like a puzzle to complete. You're experiencing it as a field to move within, and that changes what feels relevant. There's a subtle grief that can come with this, not dramatic, not obvious. A quiet letting go of identities you once invested in, the almost there version of you. The future self you were always preparing to become. You don't resent those versions, you just don't need to chase them anymore. They did their job. They brought you here. Here's something that often surprises people. When remembering deepens, your past doesn't disappear, but it stops defining the present. Old stories lose their emotional charge, not because they were resolved, but because you're no longer standing inside them. You're seeing them from the orientation of now, and now feels stable. Stability doesn't mean certainty. It means you trust yourself enough to move without guarantees. That's new, or rather, that's familiar in a way you hadn't felt since childhood. Before you learn to second-guess every impulse, notice how children move toward what feels interesting, not what feels impressive. That orientation never left you. It was just covered over by expectations. Remembering doesn't erase those expectations. It just stops mistaking them for truth. Another quiet shift. You stop waiting for permission, not in a rebellious way, in a neutral way. You realize no one is actually withholding it. You were just looking outward for a signal that only ever came from within. Let this pause for a moment. As this unfolds, relationships often reorganize themselves. Some deepen effortlessly. Others drift without conflict, not because you're pulling away, but because alignment changes proximity. You resonate differently now, and resonance does the sorting for you. This can feel lonely at times, not because you're disconnected, but because you're no longer pretending. And pretense creates artificial closeness. When it falls away, only what's real remains. That takes adjustment. If you've felt moments of quiet solitude recently, even while surrounded by people, that's part of this. Not isolation, reorientation. Here's a perspective worth sitting with. You're not here to fix the world. You're here to experience a version of it that matches your state. And as your state shifts, so does the version you encounter. Not all at once, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Reality responds to coherence more than intention. When your thoughts, emotions, and actions align, even loosely, experience smooths out, not perfectly, but honestly. This is why forcing positivity never worked. You were trying to override perception instead of listening to it. Remembering doesn't demand optimism. It allows clarity, and clarity is calmer than hope. You may find that problems still arise, but they feel more specific, less existential, less personal. They're no longer interpreted as commentary on your worth. They're just situations, and situations can be addressed. Another pause. There's a reason this feels like remembering rather than learning. Learning adds layers. Remembering removes interference. You're not installing something new, you're reducing distortion. Distortion often sounds like urgency, the feeling that something must happen soon or everything falls apart. As alignment returns, urgency dissolves, timing replaces it. You begin to trust that action taken from clarity travels farther than action taken from panic. This trust isn't blind, it's experiential. You've felt the difference. When you act from tension, resistance meets you. When you act from alignment, response meets you. Not always ease, but responsiveness. That matters. You might notice that your sense of self feels less centralized, not smaller, more distributed. You're not locked into one narrative about who you are. You're fluid, contextual, present. That fluidity is often misunderstood as inconsistency, but it's actually coherence without rigidity. You're the same awareness moving through different expressions. Let that settle. There's also something happening beneath the surface that rarely gets named. A quiet forgiveness, not necessarily of others, of yourself, for not knowing sooner, for taking the long way, for trying so hard to be what you thought you had to be. That forgiveness doesn't come from reasoning. It arrives when you realize nothing was wasted. Every detour added texture, every misalignment clarified preference. Preference matters more than people admit, not as desire, as orientation. What feels right to you isn't random, it's informational. As this becomes clearer, you may notice your decisions simplifying. Not easier, but simpler. You stop weighing every option equally. Some paths just don't light up anymore. Others do. You don't need justification. The signal is enough. If you've ever tried to explain this to someone and felt language fail, that's normal. Remembering isn't conceptual, it's lived, and lived clarity doesn't always translate. Here's another gentle realization. You don't need everyone to understand you. You just need to stop misunderstanding yourself. That alone frees an enormous amount of energy. Energy you used to spend narrating, defending, adjusting. Now it's available for presence, for attention, for experience. Presence isn't intense, it's spacious. It feels like you're finally where you are. As this continues, you may notice fewer internal debates, not because you've chosen sides, but because the argument itself dissolved. You're no longer split between who you are and who you think you should be. That integration is subtle, but profound. Another moment to breathe. If you look closely, you'll see that remembering doesn't isolate you from the world. It actually increases intimacy. Not emotional oversharing, experiential intimacy. You're meeting moments as they are, not as symbols of something else. A walk becomes just a walk. A conversation becomes just a conversation. And paradoxically, they feel richer. This is why so many people who arrive here struggle to describe it. There's nothing to point to, just a quality of presence that wasn't there before. Or rather, that was there, but overlooked. You're not ahead of anyone. You're not behind. You're simply aligned with your current orientation, and that orientation is always changing. Remembering doesn't freeze you. It frees you to move. If something in this feels familiar, you might quietly notice that you're already living parts of it. Not all, no one does, but enough to recognize the direction. That recognition is enough. There's no finish line for this, no final version of you waiting at the end, just deeper coherence, clearer perception, more honest participation. And even now, as this block of the conversation settles, the process continues. Not because of these words, but because you were already moving this way before you heard them. The words just passed through a space that was already open. That openness doesn't close when the sound stops. It stays, quietly, available, ready to be remembered again, in the next pause, the next choice, the next moment you notice yourself noticing, and from there, it unfolds on its own. And somewhere inside this openness, another shift begins to reveal itself. You start to notice how much of your life used to be driven by tension you thought was necessary. The tension to stay sharp, to stay relevant, to stay ahead of some invisible line. You didn't question it. Most people don't. It felt like gravity, like the cost of being alive and conscious. But now, that tension feels optional, not gone, just no longer unquestioned. You may still feel pressure sometimes, deadlines, expectations, consequences, but the pressure no longer defines you. It passes through instead of rooting itself inside, and that changes how you move. There's a noticeable difference between responding to life and bracing against it. Bracing is exhausting. Responding is dynamic. When remembering deepens, you catch yourself before the brace fully forms. Not always, but often enough to notice the contrast. You might realize that much of what you called anxiety was actually misdirected awareness, attention looking for something to fix. When there's nothing to fix, it turns inward and tightens. But awareness doesn't need a problem. It needs a channel, and alignment gives it one. This is where creativity quietly re-enters, not as ambition, but as expression. You don't create to prove anything. You create because something wants to move, and movement feels natural again. Another subtle change, you stop narrating your life so much. You're less busy turning experience into meaning. You let it be what it is first. Meaning comes later, if it comes at all. This can feel disorienting at first. We're taught that meaning must be extracted immediately, that if we don't label an experience, it doesn't count. But presence doesn't need translation. It's already complete. Let that sit. There's also a softening around control. Not because you've decided control is bad, but because you've noticed how little of it you ever truly had. And instead of that realization feeling frightening, it feels relieving. You're no longer trying to manage outcomes as a way to feel safe. Safety is coming from coherence now, from being aligned enough to handle whatever arises. That's a very different foundation. When challenges appear, and they still do, you meet them with curiosity instead of dread, not always calmly, but more honestly. What is this asking of me replaces, why is this happening to me? That single shift changes the entire emotional landscape. Notice how much lighter that feels. At this stage, remembering often brings a sense of quiet confidence, not loud certainty, not bravado, a grounded knowing that you can meet your own experience, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's unclear. This confidence isn't about predicting the future. It's about trusting your responsiveness. You don't need to know what's coming. You know you'll be present when it does. Presence becomes your anchor, not belief, not strategy, not identity. You may notice that your reactions slow down. The gap between stimulus and response widens just enough. In that gap, choice appears. Not forced choice, natural choice. And sometimes the choice is simply not to react at all. That's new for many people. There's a quiet intelligence in non-reaction, not suppression, discernment. You're no longer obligated to participate in every emotional invitation. This doesn't make you detached, it makes you selective. Another breath here. As remembering continues, the idea of a single, fixed self becomes less convincing. You still recognize yourself, but you're not confined to one version. You're fluid across situations, moods, environments, and instead of that feeling unstable, it feels accurate. You're beginning to sense that identity was never meant to be rigid. It was meant to be responsive. Parallel versions of you aren't somewhere else, they're here in potential. Each choice, each orientation tunes you toward one or another, not dramatically, incrementally. You feel this when a day unfolds smoothly, not because nothing went wrong, but because you stayed aligned while it did. That's not luck, that's orientation. You're no longer asking, how do I make this work? You're asking, how do I stay coherent while it unfolds? That question changes what matters. There's also a growing respect for your own limits, not as weaknesses, as information. You rest sooner. You say no earlier. You leave before resentment builds. This isn't selfish, it's accurate. Accuracy feels better than sacrifice ever did. You might notice that you're less interested in intensity, drama, high highs, low lows. Not because you're numb, but because you're regulated. Your nervous system is learning that presence is safe. That learning takes time. Be patient with it. If you look back, you may realize how long you lived slightly braced, slightly guarded, slightly prepared for things to go wrong. Remembering doesn't erase that history, it reassures it. You're teaching yourself, through experience, that you can be here without armor. That's profound. Another pause. There's a moment, sometimes fleeting, when you recognize that nothing is actually chasing you. No invisible deadline, no cosmic evaluation, just experience, arising and passing, and you, meeting it. That recognition doesn't make you passive, it makes you present. From presence, action becomes cleaner, more effective, less scattered. You do fewer things, but they land more deeply. This is alignment over effort in its lived form, not a principle, a felt reality. You may still plan, still work, still strive, but the striving is no longer against yourself. And that might be the clearest sign of remembering. The inner friction eases, not all at once, but enough to notice. If you sit with that for a moment, you might feel a quiet appreciation for how far you've already come. Not in achievement, in awareness. That appreciation doesn't inflate you, it grounds you. And as this third layer settles, there's no need to conclude anything, no insight to lock in, no lesson to carry forward. Just a recognition continuing to deepen, in ordinary moments, in pauses, in the way you meet the next experience without needing it to be anything other than what it is. That's where remembering lives, not as a destination, but as an ongoing return to coherence, to presence, to the part of you that was never lost, only temporarily forgotten. And as this continues, something very quiet becomes noticeable. You stop waiting for a moment when everything finally makes sense. Not because you've given up on clarity, but because clarity has stopped presenting itself as an endpoint. It shows up now in fragments, in how you choose your words, in what you don't react to, in the way you let moments pass without extracting anything from them. That's new, or maybe familiar in a way you haven't trusted before. There's a softness to this stage that's easy to overlook. Nothing dramatic is happening. No internal fireworks, no declaration. Just a steady sense that you're no longer standing outside your own life, observing it from a distance. You're in it, not performing, not preparing, participating. You may notice that the need to label this experience fades. You don't ask, "What is this?" as often. You let it be what it is, and that trust changes how it unfolds. There's also a subtle humility that arrives here, not self-doubt, not shrinking. An understanding that you don't need to understand everything. That awareness doesn't require dominance, it requires presence. Presence doesn't announce itself. It feels like this, like noticing your breath without adjusting it, like hearing a sound without naming it, like being aware without leaning forward or pulling back. In moments like that, the sense of separation thins, not between you and others, between you and experience itself. You're not having a moment. You are the moment. This is where the idea of remembering becomes very literal. Not remembering information, remembering orientation, how to be here without tension, how to move without forcing, how to listen without preparing a response. You didn't lose these abilities, you just stopped trusting them for a while. There may still be days where you forget again. That's not failure, that's rhythm. Remembering isn't permanent awareness, it's repeated return. And each return happens a little faster, with less drama, with more kindness toward yourself. You might catch yourself smiling for no reason, or noticing beauty without needing to share it, or feeling gratitude without directing it anywhere. Those moments don't need interpretation. They're signs of coherence. If this resonates, you might quietly recognize parts of yourself in it, not as agreement, as familiarity. That recognition is enough. There's nothing you need to take from this, nothing to apply, nothing to remember later. Because whatever mattered here has already landed, or it hasn't, and either way, that's okay. The conversation doesn't end when the sound does. It continues the next time you pause instead of push, the next time you choose honesty over habit, the next time you let yourself be exactly where you are, without rehearsal. You're not becoming someone new. You never were. You're simply remembering how it feels to be aligned with what's already here. And that remembering doesn't close. It stays open, quietly, waiting for the next moment you notice it again.